Thanks for tuning in to Talking Point today. I'm your host, Neeraj Shah. The Sensex is up 100 times since 1985. Can it happen again? And if you indeed believe in that, should you bet against India? I think that's the key question to Mr. Ramdev Agarwal, who's our special guest today on Talking Point, and his thoughts on the same form the part of the Talking Point today. Mr. Agarwal, good having you. Thanks so much for joining in. Hope all is safe.
Yes, very safe and very good morning to you and all the viewers. Very good
Thank you
morning.
so much, Mr. Agarwal. Um, that's the question that I want to start off with. We've seen that history may not repeat, but it rhymes. Do you reckon that the long history of the last 30, 35 years, can it get repeated or rhymed over the next 30 to 35 years?
It is very aptly said by somebody, prediction and that particularly of the future is very dangerous. So with that, kind of caveat, I would say that, see, I mean, when I started in 85, after becoming chartered accountant and started, so experience was very little. So the only thing was the challenge to make it, challenge to be successful, challenge to make a career, challenge to start a family, so those things were there. And you're not you're not experienced anything, you're not seen anything in the world. And I mean, you don't bother too much about what is going to happen in 10, 15, 20, 30 years. So, but when you have traveled this 35 years, I've actually traveled in the sense that right under me, index from 300, 400 has gone to 35, 40,000. And that has happened in last 30, 35 years. But if you see the journey, I mean, the conditions in 85, the conditions today, I think there is no comparison. I mean, any data you pick up, and today conditions are far more conducive for the repeat of the future. I mean, who knows 35 years, but the next 5, 10, 15 years looks far more exciting than what it was maybe in 85, 1995. At any point of time in last 35 years, I would put it.
Wow, that's encouraging. That is very encouraging. I guess some part of it stems from one point that you've kind of told me a couple of times or a number of times in our conversations, is that India is the ultimate next $1 trillion story, and the next trillion and the subsequent trillions after that will come in at a faster pace. Is that the basis, Mr. Agarwal?
Yeah, so that's what has been happening, and there is no reason why that machine will stop. It's like saying that, I mean, why we say that today at 7 o'clock, sun will be set, and tomorrow morning, sun will rise again at 7 o'clock. Because it has been happening in the past, for so many, since the mankind, since it has been happening. Like that, if you see, India started in 1947 with literally 99% of people below poverty line. It was a complete basket case as a country in 1947. When we got the independence, we had the all kinds of disturbance in the partition, and then you had the fight with Pakistan, then you had fight with China in 1962, and then 65 war, then 72 war. So we had all kinds of problems. And yet the economy grew with all the crises, all kinds of crises passing over. Economy grew between 47 and 2007 to become $1 trillion economy. It took 60 years for the economy of 1,000 million people to become $1 trillion economy. That was in 2007. And from 2007 to now 2020, we have already become 3x. I mean, almost $3 trillion. So every $1 trillion. So the second $1 trillion came in, first $1 trillion came in 60 years. Second came in 7-8 years. Third would have come in 5-6 years. Fourth will come in 3-4 years. Like that. So now China adds, say if it grows, they have now about $15 trillion their GDP. If they grow at about 6%, 7%, they add $1 trillion every year. So incidentally, China grew. China became $1 trillion in 98, and today it has become $14-15 trillion. India is exactly 13, 14 years behind, and it is very, very interestingly poised to grow, very, very nicely. The world, I think what gives me confidence is that world is growing at 6% dollar rate. I mean, let's not get into real and inflation, but the world has grown at dollar rate of about 5 to 6% in last as many 35 years. So there is no reason to believe that the world will not grow at about 5-6%. I mean, I'm no economist to say that, but I'm just extrapolating the current trend into the future. The potential is very high. So if India grows, so if the world grows at 6%, the world will become very prosperous place in next 30. That you must believe that in next 15 years, world will be from 85 trillion, it will be more like 160, 170 trillion dollars. And in that, kind of a next $85 trillion, India will have a much bigger share than what it has today. Because India's all the things required. It has the youngest population. It has the whatever is required. It has the talent. It has the political setup. It has the democracy. It has the English speaking language. Digital economy is in full rampage. Demographics are in your side. Even forex, I think one of the things which is for a poor country, which is actually, that is one thing which a poor country cannot do. That is forex. So for development, you need X amount of forex in a globally interdependent economy. And in '92, we had less than $1 billion of forex, literally less than a week's import coverage. Today, we are sitting on over $500 billion forex reserve and climbing faster than any other country, though it is the third largest after China and Japan. So, incidentally, this is the month when we have the proper trade surplus, first time in the history of, I think, 20, 30, 40 years. So, what I'm saying is that this is a time when you have enough forex, if you have demographics, you have the politics of your side, you have the world wanting more of India, and there is nothing much to challenge you. So now it is on us whether we can achieve that. And I don't have any reason to believe that we will not be able to do it.
What's the difference, Mr. Agrawal, between, say, 10, 12 years ago to now? A lot of these promises about India having good demographics, young English-speaking population, demographic, and or things on your side, existed 10, 12 years ago. But we have to admit that compared to, say, maybe a China or some of the other nations, we haven't done justice to our growth potential. So we will grow for sure. Will we be, to your mind, be able to do justice? And if so, why do you believe that now versus what your thoughts would have been 10, 12 years ago? What's the difference?
Yeah. So, this growth is something which is, even as an entrepreneur, I know that forget about a country. I mean, I've never run a country, but I have run a small business. Growth doesn't happen every year. When you think that I'm tired and now I cannot see what is happening, I put my best, then the growth happens. And growth happens beyond your limit. I remember in 1990, I started in 87. And for the first 4 years, the way we have worked between me and Moti, I mean, we used to come diligently at 10 o'clock, go back at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. So, but I mean, we earned barely 15 lakhs rupees in 4 years. Then between 90 and 92, a bull run came. The external environment was so favorable. There was a bull run, not done by me or anything, but it happened. And from that, nothing, I'm going to say 10, 15 lakhs, we earned 30 crores in 18 months. So that's how the serious foundation for Motilal Oswal was laid. And I can tell you 3-4 more instances how the tailwind in the global economics or your own economics for some reason happens and the economy is pushed to a different levels altogether. And every economy, the large economies, nobody can, I mean, of course, your hard work is required, sincerity is required, policies are required, but you need that enabling global environment for it to happen at a rapid pace. So I would say the growth, Indian economic growth between 2003 and 2007, which is unprecedented, I mean, that external trade was growing at 25-30%, and the economy grew at 8-9% compounded for 5-6 years. So that was a very different period of time. But between 2008 and 14, again we grew maybe 5-6-7%. But last 5 years, 4-5 years, has been a lot of reforms, but growth has been much more muted than what one would desire. Yes, it has happened like that.
Okay. So you believe, I mean, I think your stock picking technique starts with asking whether the magic is happening in a company or no. You reckon if India is a company, then magic is happening. Am I correct?
Yeah, see, all the ingredients are there. For magic to happen, something is amiss. I mean, all the wood is there, everything is there, but the fire is not there. So you need that one spark And I'm quite sure I've seen enough of this. When you have the complete disappointment and when you think it is not going to happen, then only it happens. And why it happens and why it will happen, I'm not the master of that. But what I've seen in the past, uh, it will happen. I mean, I don't have any doubts that it will happen.
Okay, so you're not trying to second guess, Mr. Agarwal, that it could be this whole China versus India thing which could be leading to that spark, or the fact that we are in a favorable position on a number of other counts. Something will happen. You can't quite place a finger on it right now.
Yes, it's like saying that if I become a good chartered, I've got a rank in chartered accountancy, I'll get a job. Now you say you don't have any offer, but I know it, I will get it. So you say economy is very bad, there's no job, there's so many layoffs and all. But I know for sure that I will get a job, a decent job I'll get.
Hmm. Yeah, I think once I mean, I've interacted with Mr. Agarwal now for the last 10, 15 years. Once in some of the conversations, he said sometimes you got to think positively as well for money to be made in the markets. Now, Mr. Agarwal, sorry, you want to make a point?
No. Go ahead.
Okay. So here's my question then. How do you correlate investing in that scenario with this? Because I've seen you traverse both the things, right? You used to look at profitable companies for the next 3-4 years and make investment decisions as well in the past. And you probably look at companies with a 10-15 year prism as well and make investment decisions. What are you doing right now?
Yeah, so no, investing style is same. I mean, we are voracious stock buyer. I mean, this economy and all you guys ask and we talk about it. Actually, we should not be allowed to talk because that's a subject which is very specialized subject, and only economists or the guys who are trained in that, they should talk and have an opinion. But coming back to investing is far more simpler and much smaller game than the game of economics. And even in a flat economy, there'll be winners and losers. Some businesses will win big time and some businesses will lose big time. So our job is to find the companies, businesses and the companies which are going to win, and put our small bet, whatever little we have, and wait for that the company to perform. So that's what patiently we have to do. See, basically in investing, three things are required. One, you got to have vision to see that these businesses or companies are going to do well. Second, you should have courage to buy. And third is patience to hold, because when it doesn't work or things take little time for it to work, then you should not become impatient. So I think if you, I mean, over a period of time, in last 35 years, I think this is what exactly we have mastered, or we have got over our behavioral, setbacks, and we are working that. So the investing style remains same, the process doesn't change, and even in a flat or 1 or 2% kind of, say 3, 4, 5% GDP growth rate. I don't know what is the most pessimistic, what do you call, forecast for the GDP growth rate. But even if it is 4, 5%, we will see a lot of winners and losers in the marketplace. Of course, it cannot match with the general boom in the market. When you have 7, 8%, 9% growth, government tax buoyancy is massive. Government is giving orders left, right, and center. There is an infra spend. There is a shortage of every damn thing. I mean, the capacity is running out. People are adding up capacity overnight. What is your capex becomes my revenue. So suddenly there is a huge demand, very strong demand. Today, if you ask me in COVID period, I mean, when is the boom going to come? We don't know when the COVID is going to end, and in what shape it is going to leave us. What is the kind of damage? Then damage assessment will happen, and then what are the counter-cyclical policy government itself takes, and which businesses are in good shape, bad shape. I mean, those things have to be seen. Today, it's all kind of a lot of uncertainties there, unprecedented uncertainties there, and yet we have to invest in that uncertain environment.
Yeah, you do. But your whole presentation that you made and whole belief about don't bet against India, it's surely not just preempted on a few stocks that will do well, right? You presume that the economy as whole would do well. So therefore, my question, a couple of questions, not on the economic growth forecast, but something that impacts the economic growth and thereby maybe markets. Do you like this recent spate of reforms, Mr. Agarwal? I mean, Ashok Gulati likened the agri reforms to the ones that were done by the Manmohan Singh government in 1991, the land labor reforms waiting to be cleared as well. They've kind of been brushed under the carpet because of COVID. But do you like what is happening here?
Yes, I mean, if it is executed well, clearly these are far-reaching reforms, particularly this agricultural thing, APMC kind of thing, where now the buyers can buy directly from the farmers. Farmers could probably sell to anybody, but buyers couldn't buy, bypassing the APMC. So now I think the large retailers which are coming up, like what we are seeing, the organized retailers, they can buy the farm to fork. That concept could become real. And it takes a little time. It is not a 12 months kind of action, but you'll start seeing in 2 to 3 years time, the farmers growing for the retailers, and they will keep their business model will change and become better. And I think it has a potential to bring kind of a revolutionary impact in rural India, because rural India is well supported, tax laws are very lax, and it is in private sector. I mean, good thing is that farming is not with the government, so the farmers can organize themselves and get in agreement with the retailers. So I think it is a work in progress, but I'm hopeful that it can become big in 3, 4, 5 years time.
That can add meaningfully to maybe even the investable community, right? Because it may not be direct place, but this would impact a lot of revenue streams for a lot of companies, I reckon.
Yeah, it all depends on execution. What kind of promotion is there and who is blocking it. So it's all in execution. I mean, a lot of things. Say we de-licensed, but not a single steel plant came in Orissa, despite the boom of 2003 or 2008. So, I mean, fundamentally, we should have got at least 5 to 10 new steel plants in Orissa, but nothing came. So it was not a broad policy was right, but finally at the execution level, it didn't happen. So flawless execution, and this to become a movement and scale up in millions and millions of ton and all over the country, that takes time. India, slowly you have to set an example. Say in next 2, 3 years, Punjab, UP, Bihar, Punjab, UP, Haryana, they have the very advanced practices in agriculture. They will show the example, and that trend will pass over to Gujarat, Maharashtra, and other places. I would think that, and with the internet, I think it can happen much faster.
So, are you making any investment hypotheses, if not essential large investment decisions on something like this? I'll just go piece by piece, Mr. Agarwal, so that people understand. Sticking to agri right now, are you trying to do that?
Yeah. So I'm a village boy, so I understand how this so-called rural economy works. I mean, so how do you make money? Because rural consumption, see, basically stock market is more about discretionaries. So where is the discretionary spend of the rural India will go? Say liquor, it will go to motorcycles, it will go to cheap entry-level cars, it will go to agro inputs, some pesticides, fertilizers, tractors. Of course, you see the tractors are booming. Tractor is the only segment of the economy entire which is all-time high in terms of production and sales. So clearly that rural push is visible. It is not something to do with this reform, but clearly rural economy has been very resilient and has not been, I would say it has remained more or less undamaged by the COVID. And monsoon has been very good. Farm prices have been very good. So I think that portion of the economy where 2/3 of the population is there, but only 1/3 of the income comes. Let's not forget that right now rural economy is much smaller in the total scheme of the game. So benefits will be very small pockets, and we have to figure out the companies which have monopolistic tendency, and yet it has been loved by rural India. So you have to go one by one, whether a tractor company, whether a motorcycle company, whether a pesticide company, or rural logistic company, or something like that.
Okay, fair call. Mr. Agarwal, the second point again about not betting on India, not betting against India, excuse me, would be what's the nature of businesses that could actually propel the next leg of growth? Now, I'm not trying to get into sectors. What I'm trying to understand from you is when you're looking at companies currently, are you looking at risk takers, entrepreneurs who don't mind betting their balance sheet right now on growth, even if it looks ugly for a few quarters, years, etc., but there is growth potential? Or are you banking upon companies which are displaying both the balance sheet growth and the ability to take risk, yes, but minimal, so that it doesn't damage the balance sheet? I mean, how are you approaching this? Because I know you give a lot of importance to balance sheet.
Yeah, so today what is most important is who is going to come unscathed or stronger from the storm.
The
That
COVID
is one
storm,
of the
you mean?
most important. Yeah, this COVID storm which is on, it is going to break a lot of businesses. I mean, particularly the weaker businesses which are not run well before the COVID. They'll be more susceptible because the government help will also be very limited, and business in any case is shut for most of them. So you have a double blow. And third is that they're leveraged. Business is bad, government support is not there, and they're leveraged. So I think this triple blow is going to cripple a lot of companies. So we have to see that we are not in that category first. I mean, we have to find the companies which are clear survivor. I mean, not a chance, but clearly a survivor. That is the first thing. Second is whether what they do. I mean, what is the potential of the business in the future? In the sense that is there a potential? Is the penetration levels for their products are low? How is the competitive situation? How the competitive forces will shape up in the future? One of the things COVID is doing is that competitive forces for a lot of businesses have suddenly come down because the new entrants which were coming or the ones which were even at a loss, those who are challenging the existing incumbents, they have taken a back seat because either seed money is not there or the market itself has collapsed. So clearly, when the COVID storm is over, we come out of COVID in next 1 or 2 years, I think the existing successful companies will have a clear runway for 2-3 years without any challenge. So I think we are looking at the companies which are going to come out prosperously out of this storm.
So the big and the ones which are not necessarily big, but the ones which remain unscathed kind of might do better. I reckon that's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, not only unscathed. I mean, like actually, very few businesses are doing better. You see, now this is the quarter in which good and bad, ugly, it will all be clear. I mean, you might have seen 80% decline in the profit. Somebody will have 5% decline in profit. Somebody actually will grow by 30-40%. I mean, like we got to find that 5-10 companies which are going to grow like that. I mean, this is not end of the world. Let me tell you, this COVID 1 quarter, 2 quarters, but this is going to give a very fuzzy kind of environment. I mean, people will get so confused. How much is the pent up demand? How much is the actual decline? How strong is the franchise? There will be a lot of question marks, and market will not know how to price it. So here is an opportunity for you to know the company better, and you say COVID, no COVID, this company is going to win big time, and hence this is mispriced, and let me buy into that.
Yeah, the number of variables probably have just increased tremendously. Mr. Agarwal, a small follow-up, because I see a lot of disparity in opinion from people. And again, I mean, I know you yourself will tell me that my opinion is an opinion right now. It may not be right or wrong. But I think everybody's confused about what are the, not the companies, but the businesses or the business models which will succeed or fail post-COVID, right? Obituaries are written for the cinema halls. And at the same time, people are coming in saying that multiplexes are still here to stay. Again, obituaries are written for malls saying that this will not succeed, but there are enough and more people who believe that human being is a social animal, and therefore these businesses will be here even if they kind of go away after. I mean, they face some problem in the next couple of quarters. Have you been able to, or I'm sure you've given thoughts, but have you been able to say to yourself with certainty what are these businesses that last and what are the ones that may not last?
Yeah, so one is that you start with a portfolio. We had our fully invested portfolio on the very day of the COVID, and then the show started. COVID show started. So see, in COVID show, whatever was little weaker company in your portfolio from any segment, say financials, your banks, you have all kinds of banks. You have the best of the banks, and you have slightly not so great a bank. So right at the early stage, the way Buffett did, what Buffett did, he sold all the airline stock. He realized that this particular business model has broken for not now, but probably broken for a pretty long time to come. So he decided to get out of the whole thing in a hurry at a loss also. So clearly the message is that at this point of time, if you realize that COVID has broken the business model or it has exposed the weakness of the model, I think you are better off getting rid of that particular company and get into something which is better chance of survival and prosperity. So you improve the quality of the portfolio in at this point of time. So when I come out, I come out with only good and prospering companies.
Okay. So you yourself also believe that it might be better to kind of take that call right now. You might have taken the call in your portfolio as well. Why stay with risky businesses even if the price has fallen? Best to rearrange or realign the portfolio.
Because pre-COVID, with best of your vision and capability, you selected a portfolio pre-COVID. But you are not God. I mean, nobody knew COVID is coming and what all
That's true.
aspects of COVID is there, and lockdown is there, and resilience of businesses. It's not that the businesses which we have not suffered. They have also suffered. But I mean, there is a difference between, I think it is an assessment, reassessment of who is going to come out with least possible damage, I would say. Damage is there to almost everybody. But who is going to come out with the least possible damage?
Okay, I get that point. The other point, and I'm just borrowing a slide from one of the presentations that I saw, Mr. Agarwal, you make in that conference that you had, which is about the growth that India may have. And you called 7 to 8% GDP growth for the next 35 years as a Lollapalooza. Now, my question being that if indeed that's the ideal thing to happen, and you are saying that it's difficult to predict that, but let's make that as a hypothesis. What do you bet on then? Do you bet on inward-looking businesses because India will grow that fast? Or do you bet on companies or businesses that are going out and conquering the world? Or is it an ideal mix of both?
See, the issue is that I don't do like this. I don't look at macro that much. I start, so once I'm bullish, once my my mindset is there that yes, the world is going to be fine in a 6 months or 1 year, or say like next 10 years, the world is going to be fine, and I have to invest. I have to be in equity stocks and all. Then we go about finding the businesses right from bottoms up. Who's putting up new business model, or whose business model is successful, or the one which are successful, do they have any new challenges, or has their opportunities even become bigger? Because the winning companies, they also keep finding newer ways of making more and more money and become bigger and bigger. So you have to just keep chasing the successful entrepreneur and successful model, and rest all will be taken care of by whatever happens externally. And the guys who are prepared mind, those who are in the readiness, they only become lucky at some point of time. So out of your portfolio of say 25 stocks, there will be every year 2 or 3 stocks which will become lucky also. Maybe you are not bought it for them, but suddenly there is a spot in the demand. There is something which happens which will take the growth to different levels, and hence you get disproportionately rewarded. But finding only those 2 companies and putting money is impossible.
Yeah, I agree. No, okay, let me try and rephrase my question, sir. Let's say, for example, let me take technology as an example, right? Everybody thought that Indian technology will not do well. Somehow COVID-19 has brought out some degree of optimism out there. At the same time, now Indians have the option to a product that you have, which is that NASDAQ ETF product, or even going out and investing directly to invest in global technology leaders too, or invest in a Reliance Industries, which has got this geo platforms. Hey, what do you think? What do you think that the global facing and the global dominating businesses will win, or will Indian IT also have its place under the sun?
No, Indian IT is the world beater. In fact, a lot of these world beating companies are being built. They are built in Hyderabad. I mean, a lot of the software and modules are built in Hyderabad and Gurgaon and Bangalore. So clearly, Indian IT services has its own unparalleled kind of support to the global digital move or whatever is happening in the world of technology. But Indian services, Indian tech professionals are complete backbone to global IT revolution. So I would not dissociate, though the Indians are making based on not so much of an innovation. They make it more on the hard work they're doing by the hour. But clearly, in India's digital capability is one of the biggest differentiator. In fact, in the presentation I have said this is a very unique thing that for a country of $2,000 per capita, typically you don't find that level of sophistication in digital capability. Today, digital capability of India is staggering. I mean, we'll get to see more of it as we go along. But since we have developed these systems for others worldwide, and they're supporting them day in, day out, there is enough talent to do what the world is doing, and maybe in some cases better than the world, and we can take the lead also. So clearly, India's digital capability is far higher than the per capita income India has.
Yeah, no, but the question is, I mean, sorry if I misunderstood your answer, but a lot of people write obituaries, or not obituary, but that investability possibility in Indian IT being low because they are doing rudimentary back-end work and not quite innovating. You don't agree with that?
No, you see, business is not about, I mean, I'll tell you, most simplest businesses can make more money than very complex businesses. Airline business is so complex. I mean, the logistically, it's nightmare to give you a smooth ticket and lift you up from the ground safely and take you to fly at 35,000 feet and land you back in some city in Delhi or something. So for those 1 2 hour flight, you get paid less than $100, maybe more like $50 $60. So there is a lot of complication, and yet you are not able to make money. But if a good street side food, or say vada pav or something, is available in the street where there is no competition, he can make more assured money than an airline company. So it's not about sophistication. It is about how you add value and how little competition in what you are doing is important. It is not about the what looks to be very advanced or complicated uh, and cutting edge technology and all. Money making is very different from so-called sophisticated things.
Well, sir, telecom is doing something completely simple as well, right? Connecting you and me, connecting you to others, me to others, and without competition as well. Do you reckon it has found its place under the sun?
Yes, it's a utility. Competitive situation has become very, very. I mean, as I said, the difference between MB Valley and Mumbai was internet, quality of
In the
internet.
conversation before, yeah.
Yeah. So, the importance of internet has become so high and it is increasing by the day. I mean, your life is, the whole economy is running right now on the backbone of internet, given by these telecom companies. So the technology is playing a lot more role in running the economy or day-to-day life of the people. So telecom companies with now 2 or 3 players left, just about, uh, and so it is a very interesting place. It's not only telecom; it's internet also, I would say, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
everything else adding on top of it. So I think it's an interesting time. I mean, they have not made money for last 10, 12 years. I think they need to make money. The government must see to it. Government must see to it that they make money so that they can spend more on the capital expenditure here. But it remains a utility, and the potential of making 30-40% return on equity is not possible. But today it is in negative. So from there to 15% kind of a thing. So when you go from very bad to reasonably good, it's a huge delta. It is not. It is never going to be Liver and Nestle. It is not going to be 100% ROE. It is a utility, so it will be very capex dependent. And but then you can make a lot of money. Absolute amount of money to be made would be high, though the return on capital will be much lower.
Okay. Mr. Karwal, one final question, or maybe the last couple of questions, depending on how you give me a response. But you've looked at businesses, balance sheets, business models now for the last so many years. In the last 3 months, anything that you've tracked which has surprised you positively? A business model, a business decision, um, a, a, an annual report or a balance sheet that you would have seen and you would have thought that there'll be a lot of stress, but there wasn't because the company managed it well. Anything that has surprised you in the last 3 months positively?
No, I see. What has surprised me is actually resilience of the technology and the role of technology in running day-to-day life of the people at large, all over the world. So that has clearly. But as far as the data flow is concerned, right now the post-COVID impact is yet to be seen, in the sense that the first quarter numbers are coming now. So I'm very eagerly seeing each and every numbers, as many as I can see and analyze. Where is the true franchise, in the sense that where they can survive and where they can prosper. So it is just about to start it. We have seen few technology companies, one retail company. So we are seeing the impacts on their business models. So it's a work in progress. I have not seen, except for relation about this telecom and technology,
Mhm.
uh, uh, I'm not, in fact, I'm most stunned by the stock market resilience in this period when markets took off from 7,500, 600 Nifty to the current levels. I mean, that has been the biggest positive surprise for me. But otherwise, uh, I'm just trying to grapple with what is breaking down and what is intact.
Well, that's interesting. But viewers, remember in an earlier conversation, as Mr. Agarwal had told us, it's also important to stay invested during trying times because the bottom number doesn't belong to the person who times, but belongs to the person who stayed invested. So maybe staying invested would be the game. But Mr. Agarwal, this
You know, it
was
actually
sorry, yeah,
worked.
please. It
Actually, it
did.
worked. I'm telling you, I was so bearish personally, but I didn't reflect in my portfolio activity in the
Okay.
sense that, for the conversation, we can always have bullish talk and bearish talk, but portfolio goes 100% invested. So, it drives my changes within the portfolio, but I never go in cash. Broadly, never go in cash. 2-3% here and there, okay, but broadly stay invested. So I got the 100% throwback from bottom to top.
Yeah, and I remember in one of the conversations when you were in Ambi Valley, we were at 7,700, and you had said that who knows, 7,700 might be the bottom. It's
Yeah,
touch would turn out that way for now. Let's see if it does. But Mr. Agarwal, this was lovely. Thank you so much for taking the time out. And I hope people
thank
carry home the message, don't bet against India.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And viewers, thanks for tuning into this very special edition of The Talking Point.